Hello, everybody, and welcome to Washington Post Story Mode, the show where we break down the biggest video game news of the week every week from now until the end of time. Or I guess, until we stop, whichever comes first. I am Washington Post video game reporter Nathan Grayson, and today I am joined by my long-suffering editor, Mikhail.
Hi, everyone. Long-suffering editor checking in.
And this week, we're doing things a little bit differently than we normally would, in that we are talking about a piece of Mikhail's reporting that dropped this week. And that is a very big and explosive report on the state of things at an organization called TSM, which seems to be racked by some pretty serious labor issues at the moment. So, Mikhail, can you kind of walk us through what you published?
Sure. So the story that I published yesterday has kind of two main pillars. One of those is one that was pretty widely known, kind of widely alleged before. There was a big Wired report about this in January of this year. And that's about the workplace conduct of the CEO of TSM, Andy Dinh. He's a former professional League of Legends player. He founded TSM. He is now the CEO of Blitz, which is another company, a sister company of TSM's. Blitz is an esports analytics software company. And the general allegations around Andy are that he yells a lot at his employees during calls, demeans them for their work, has very kind of unclear standards about what he expects from people's work. And the result of that is that there's been a pretty big exodus of talent from TSM and Blitz over the past couple of years. And that's evident even from kind of a pretty cursory LinkedIn search. You can sort of see a lot of short tenures at the company. But in general, in the story, there are a lot of reports from folks that I talked to of, managers being fired after confrontations with Dinh, or people bringing up points that Dinh wasn't happy about, or other upper management wasn't happy about, and that resulting in their termination shortly thereafter. That has generally been sort of widely alleged, widely known in the industry for a while now. The second pillar of the story that I think is probably new to this report is that a couple of the workers that I spoke with alleged that they were misclassified as contractors. And California has really, really strict rules around who's a contractor and who's an employee, to the degree that one of the experts that I spoke with, and this isn't a quote that made it into the story, but one of the experts I talked to said that basically when they oversee hiring in California, they just full on do not even think about contracting because it is such a burden to find people who meet the criteria of a contractor in the state of California.
Mm-hmm.
And from the conversations I had, TSM was working with probably dozens of contractors, which if the criteria is so high, that doesn't quite add up. And the end result of that is that if the difference between contractors and employees has to do with certain requirements of employers.
Mm-hmm.
Employers have to give meal breaks and rest breaks and vacation time and pay certain taxes for their employees, and they don't have to do that for contractors. And if, say, the Department of Labor were to look into this and say, hey, TSM, Blitz, you have to remunerate all of these workers who were improperly classified, that could add up to a lot of money, especially if it's in the double-digit numbers of employees. So,
right. Well, yeah. Well, first, a couple of things. For one, hey, Buckman, who do we have on today? We have Mikhail, who you might know from such places as the Washington Post and Twitter. Yeah, we're just walking through the story that he published this week about TSM. Let's see. NA Esports orgs doesn't run itself into the ground. Such doesn't abuse or harass its employees. Challenge impossible. Yeah. No. So what you've said, what I'm curious about here is you're talking about these elements of potential misclassification, and that sounds very egregious, right? And so you're saying if California was to investigate this. So I guess the big question at that point is why aren't they, or why haven't they?
I think the realistic answer to this is that this is a red flag from the perspective of employment law.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the kind of, I wouldn't say accepted wisdom, but a lot of startups, a lot of smaller companies will try and get away with this because they're small enough that they fly under the radar. it's a big no-no in California, but at a certain scale, the Department of Labor just isn't looking at this sort of thing.
Mhm.
TSM, when we reached out to them for comment, we said, hey, how many employees do you have working at the company at TSM and Blitz? And they told us 123 people, and that the number of contractors varies. They wouldn't give us any more detail there. 123 people across those two companies is a bit bigger, I think, than like a small startup that's getting away with misclassifying like two people.
Mhm.
That's kind of operating at a different magnitude. I personally don't know the exact scale of the issue at TSM.
Mhm.
And I've heard from a lot of other people that this is pretty rampant at other esports orgs as well and other tech
Right.
companies. Um, I think it's really just a matter of folks haven't reported this in a way that would reach the Department of Labor, would
Mhm.
reach the appropriate governmental bodies, or it, hasn't risen to the level of attention that a Washington Post story might bring it to. So um, it remains to be seen if the Department of Labor looks into this and investigates. That's not clear right now. I don't have any insight into whether that's happening, whether that
Mhm.
will happen, but that's probably the clearest answer of like why they're not looking into it yet, just because it's one of any number of companies. So
Right. Well, yeah, that also makes sense from the standpoint of like it was not until fairly recently that the Department of Labor even started paying attention to things like video game companies.
hmm,
And, major video game companies like Activision, Blizzard, or what have you are significantly larger than a TSM.
hmm,
And yet even then, they've only really risen to that level of notice in the past handful of years in
yeah,
a way that is significant and impactful. And
yeah,
so like, esports is tied up in this certainly, but it may not be such a high priority. And then on top of that, you have to factor in just funding and things like that. The number of people that anything like the NLRB or what have you
hmm,
has to disperse out amongst all of these different companies that might be running afoul of various laws.
yeah.
And yeah, it becomes easier to see how a even a company with over 100 employees could slip under the radar.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny. Every article about video games or esports for like a mainstream publication has to have that paragraph in it that says like video games and esports are a huge industry. They bring in X amount of money. And that used to be like a selling point, I think, for video games and esports companies. And now it is a mark of like, oh, this industry merits scrutiny. The government's going to start looking at this. Like, this is going to become something that starts mingling with like real levers of power.
Hmm.
So I would not be surprised if we start seeing more investigations into big esports organizations from the Department of Labor, state departments of labor, state investigators and regulators. It's just par for the course
Hmm.
when you become an industry of that scale.
Right. Yeah, Ryan and Jets. I wonder if Riot or any other companies that interact heavily with TSM could take action if the abuse is revealed to be even more widespread.
So that's an interesting question because right now Riot does have an investigation ongoing
Mhm.
into Andy Dinh and his behavior, and that was prompted by I want to say sometime in November, the former TSM League Pro Doublelift mentioned on stream that Andy was not a particularly good coworker in his
Mhm.
perspective, and he was talking about all of these people that had grievances with Andy around how TSM was
Mhm.
run. And I think that
Yeah, let's
prompted
see.
a lot of
Yeah.
people to start speaking up. And that led to an investigation internally at TSM that TSM insists is being run by an outside investigator, kind of third party that Andy has recused himself from. Riot's running its own investigation as well. The
Mhm.
question there, the thing that's not super clear yet, and this will kind of merit its own follow up writing and report, I think, um, it's not apparent what the scope of Riot's investigation is. I don't know if
Mhm.
they're looking into the content team, for example, or if they're just looking into the League of Legends side of things at TSM.
Right,
That's
right.
really not clear yet. So you never know. I think we'll
Yeah.
start finding out in the next couple of weeks, maybe, but
Mhm.
at this point, it's not clear.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that so in chat, lazily just said it's going to be hard to convince Riot to do anything because TSM is one of, if not the biggest esports teams they have. They care about the money first and foremost. But that last bit, I'm curious about because, as far as I know, and maybe this changed, but for Riot, is League esports even profitable, or is it more of like a marketing thing? Is it something that they use to put League of Legends on the map, less so to actually extract profit?
I believe this was there was a story by Teddy
Hmm.
earlier this year or late last year. It might have been Teddy and Shannon together on our. And I think if you look up League of Legends profitability or League of Legends Riot profits,
Hmm.
you'll find an answer. And I think the answer is no. League is
Yeah.
not profitable from an esports perspective,
Right.
but it
And
is.
then what you have at that point though would be, if esports is more about the image of the game,
Hmm.
then something like this stands to impact the image of the game in a pretty big way, which I could then see kind of, incentivizing a company like Riot to act more than maybe if this was purely about money.
Mm. The thing that I'm curious about, this is sort of a tangent, but Riot recently announced a new format for Valorant esports that'll
Hmm.
have kind of similar franchised leagues, but instead they're framing it as partnerships. And
Hmm.
once a team enters a partnership with Riot to enter its league, um, that team does not need to pay entry fees or participation fees in the
Hmm.
same way that league teams might, or teams in the Overwatch League or Call of Duty League might. And I wonder if the realization there is that the money is not going to come from franchising fees. It's going to come from the other side of the Valorant partnership that they just announced, which is they're going to be partnering with these teams to develop in game content, which I assume is going to be skins or gun buddies or player cards, stuff like that. That is then going to be sold to players. I think maybe Riot is coming to the realization that that is a more certain way to make money than
Hmm.
through trying to build a league that is very similar to traditional sports.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, based on the fact that like I'm not sure if there are any like esports leagues attached to specific games and run by the companies in question that are profitable. So,
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, I would imagine that a lot of eyes are on that initiative just to be like, okay, well, if they can do it, maybe we can do it, and maybe esports can finally, bring money to the games in question as opposed to just a culture and a scene and some increased marketing
Hmm.
opportunities, increased advertising opportunities, and all of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in the specific case of this story, what I wanted to talk to is kind of you were talking about the fact that like I think in this case this is sort of flown beneath the radar of regulators, and so I guess what does that end up looking like? Like you were talking about Andy, and so like how does he run the show? At least according to the people that you talk to,
Mhm.
and where does that sort of leave things in terms of what it's like to work at a place like TSM? Like, how does that both look like and differ from, for example, what we've been hearing about working at major video game companies that also
Mhm.
have their own swath of labor related issues?
So there are a couple of things that I've heard that I think distinguish a place like TSM from, say, an Activision Blizzard, hypothetically. One
Hmm.
thing that I heard in several calls, people were very explicit about this because I think they were sort of media savvy and thinking about framing. Folks that I
Hmm.
interviewed were like, okay, TSM is not a boys club in the traditional imagination of what that looks like.
Hmm.
And I think most of the issues were sort of pegged to Andy's management style and the management style of the people that he empowered. There is sort of like a clique around Andy, essentially. Andy himself, according to the people I talked to, is pretty abrasive, and it's not really clear how he's going to behave on a call when you're working on a project with him. There's a quote really early in the story where one of the sources likens him to like a volcano and says, you never know what kind of Andy you're going to get on the call. He could be calm, could be, normal, inquisitive, or, if you're in a one-on-one with him, it could completely blow up. And I think you don't even need a lot of that necessarily, although the fact that I spoke to so many people and they all had the same kinds of stories sort of tells me that this did happen with some level of frequency. But if that sort of thing happens, you're going to be on edge all the time.
Hmm.
Towards the end of the story, there are a couple of quotes to the tune of, I was going to raise issues. I was going to kind of mention things that I didn't like about how my team was run, how TSM was run, a thing we were working on, a project, whatever. But I was worried that I would get in trouble, I would get fired, I would lose my job, what have you, because I had seen that happen. And so once an executive sort of sets that example, I think that sets the tone for the experience you have at the company and the
Hmm.
willingness you have to speak up, to make changes, to sort of advocate for reform, new workplace processes, new styles of work, etc.
Hmm.
And that sort of slows things down, gums up the works. Um, I feel like it does have a real kind of measurable impact on how work happens on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, to me, it's sort of like the fact that this can happen at all sort of is reminiscent of, quote unquote, startup culture or what have you.
Mm,
And I think that it's interesting because you end up in a place where like this company is no longer, an itsy bitsy startup, right? It has
mm,
again over 100 employees, but it's still small enough that it can run kind of according to the whims of one person, or at least that one person can, like you said, set the tone
mhm.
in this way that really impacts what other people will do or say. And eventually, per your story, kind of pushes them out.
Yeah,
Um, and so, yeah, I think that it's just this like, it's this spot that a company can ultimately occupy while, growing large enough to have a significant impact. And certainly TSM does within esports.
yeah.
But it's still vulnerable enough to the machinations of one person or a small group of people
There
that
was
they
a
can kind of like maintain power, indefinitely, or at least until something like this happens.
Yeah. There was a detail that kind of frustrated me yesterday. So, in the process of writing the story, we reached out to TSM and Blitz for comment. We outlined like all of the allegations in the story. What do you think about this characterization? What's your response to this?
Hmm.
Etc. 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 Very detailed, long email
Yeah.
sent to them, and they declined to make Andy available. Sent basically the same statement they had sent to Wired. There was one update to the general statement, which is that in the original statement to Wired, there's a note that Riot's investigation will be done in the next 2 weeks or something like that. And obviously
Mhm.
that never
Yeah,
happened.
they removed
So
that.
I got back to them and I was like, we cannot run a statement that says this is going to release in 2 weeks when you said that in January
Mhm.
and it hasn't happened. So we got an update on that front. But
Yeah.
um,
I
they
mean,
declined to
they
make Andy available. And then
mhm.
on the Team Solo Mid, the TSM subreddit, Andy responded to the very first anecdote in the story about the firing of the HR executive and said,
Mhm.
"Oh, I want to be clear. I'm very hands off. I didn't work with this person very much, yada yada." And the sort of the hands off comment sort of it stuck out to me because in the reporting, what I heard a lot of was Andy would just pop into meetings, and
Mhm.
that's well within his rights as the CEO of a company to be in meetings to know what's going on. But the sense that I got was that like it's a big company, but he's taking a lot of calls that like the CEO, it wasn't apparent to me that he needed to be in them.
Mhm.
Um, Ultimately, not my judgment to make. Sit in on whatever calls you want, but I think that speaks to sort of management style, level of control over the company, where you have contractors who are
Mhm.
saying, "Oh yeah, I was constantly in meetings with the CEO of this company." That seems a bit strange, and it runs counter to Andy's response on Reddit to our story, which was like, I'm hands on the business.
Right.
That might be the case now in the kind of couple of months between Wired's original report and this report.
Mhm.
I don't think that is true to the reporting that I
Right.
did for this story.
Yeah. And also, like, potentially historically. And so if it's a thing where you've only changed in recent times, you don't get to say, like, "I am this way," because, like, maybe you turned over a new leaf, but, like, it's yet to bear itself out.
Mm,
I think the other thing that's interesting there is that, like, I see some companies and, like, people who work at companies that are being reported on in a critical way do this more and more often, where they will, like, play ball with a reporter to a limited extent
mm,
and then through their own channels be like, "Oh, look, the reporter got this wrong."
mhm.
Like they, this is not the full story. I'm going to tell you the full story. That person is, a liar and a deceiver. And it's like, or you could have just, replied to the questions in good faith
Yeah.
But of course, you wanted to undercut the reporting, and you
Yeah.
knew it, so you planned to. Like, you know,
I've seen a couple of people on Reddit who are like, "Well, why would Andy respond to an article to a journalist he doesn't know? Like, why would he do that?"
mhm,
And they're saying that in response to Andy's response to our story. Like, he's already responding. It's just a different medium, and I like don't understand the logic there of
mhm,
like, yeah, not going to play ball with the story, the thing that everyone's going to see, but I'm going to make my own separate statement that is a
mhm.
response. It just it doesn't add up to me. I don't
Right,
entirely understand it. I don't want to like ascribe intent to it, but
right,
it's
of
a
course.
very weird move.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it sort of fits with this era in which like everyone is kind of an influencer, micro influencer.
Mhm.
It's just like I can understand why people who are part of a scene like esports, where a lot of the players also have their own, Twitch channels and everything else like that, and basically function as influencers in addition to pros. Look at a situation like this and say, why are they talking to somebody they don't know? Why not go through the medium of somebody who like they do know and who has a platform or what have you? Because
Mhm.
that's increasingly becoming the norm in a way that is not incompatible with journalism, but does mean that a lot of people who don't follow journalism traditionally find some elements of journalism to be either like foreign to them or
Mhm.
not well explained.
Yeah. No, absolutely. The heartening thing I'll say is that yesterday, at least when the story came out, engaging with folks who are reading the story and kind of processing it, which
Mhm.
I really appreciate. It's like a 3,000 word story. If you read it, thank you.
Interesting
Um,
that you keep telling me I can only do like 1,400 words, but then you
hey,
get to do 3,000 words.
I do 3,000 words once every couple of months, and you get to do 3,000 words, in 1 month if we put all the stories together. So it
Wow.
all it evens out.
Wow.
It evens out.
I don't agree with this line of thinking, but move on.
We have a monthly quota of words that writers can use up, and so I just bank mine for really really big stories. But since you're writing more frequently, you can't do that, and that's the way it
Mhm.
works.
I
Uh,
think Mikhail is lying, not just to me, but also to an audience of people. So
no,
it's messed up on many levels.
one thing I want to mention right now because I have it up on a screen. Yesterday, Doublelift was he read the story on stream, and one
Mm,
of the things he mentioned that I saw kind of aggregated in coverage after the fact was that he alluded to the fact that he had received a legal threat from TSM for speaking out,
mm,
and it appears that a couple of minutes ago, maybe 10 minutes ago or 15 minutes ago, Doublelift tweeted the legal threat that he received, the full letter. Haven't been able to look at it.
interesting.
Haven't been able to read it right now. Can't uh, authenticate it beyond the fact that it is on Doublelift's Twitter account.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm pulling it up right now.
yeah. But what I'll say is that the scoop I can reveal is that
Yeah.
this seems pretty consistent with things I've heard.
Mhm.
Like I don't think that this is a one-off letter to one person. Um, so it doesn't seem weird or out of step to me, is all I'll say.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, and this is from November 12th. So
Hmm.
yeah, this is from a
Which
little
would
while
have
back.
been, yeah, that would have been around the time that he streamed in the first place.
Hmm.
And I think probably before the TSM and Riot investigations
Hmm.
began. Those are first reported in January, but I think they started a bit earlier than that after Doublelift had first streamed and kind of started talking about this.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's
I'm excited to read it in full later. Um,
oh wait, I know that lawyer. Wow, that's funny. Bryce
isn't
Bloom.
isn't Bryce also like an Overwatch League caster? Doesn't he also
Uh,
cast on the side?
wait, I don't know that part. I've just reached out to him for a few
Oh.
stories. Let's see. LMAO double if goaded for this. Huh.
Oh.
Um, Let's see. Yeah. Leveraging Reddit is about manipulating direct fan base / public support mechanisms to craft alternative narratives to counter negative ones. It's
Mm.
politics. Yep. Definitely agree with that.
I
Um,
I agree, and also, I mean, maybe this is more kind of evidence to that same point. I like in like the past 2 years that I've reported on esports,
mhm,
however haltingly and irregularly, I've had a really good time interacting with people on specific esports subreddits
mhm,
because they tend to be able to engage with the substance. I think this would vary. I don't think that would be true on like r/Halo. It's true on like the Valorant competitive subreddit, and it's good to go there and talk to people. But I think that can also go in the opposite direction, where, of course, on the like TSM subreddit, that's where Andy Dinh is going to post his response to
mhm.
our article.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, it fosters a kind of like in-group mentality,
Mm,
which already, a lot of these teams do anyway. Like that's the idea, right? You support your favorite team.
mm,
And so then it becomes it's not much of a leap to be like, all right, now that, like the enemies are at the gates or like somebody is, criticizing us in a way that we don't like,
mhm.
let's, bring everyone together. Let's be like, yeah, we're on the same team. And these people are trying to bring us down in some way that is wrong or unfair.
Yeah.
So yeah, it fits. Let's see.
Someone in the comments just wrote, "Did anyone in your reporting
Yeah.
point to the public videos of Reggie bullying people?" So this is an interesting. This sort of came up yesterday when I was watching the Doublelift stream.
Hmm.
I did not. A lot of those videos refer or relate to Andy's interactions with esports athletes,
Hmm.
and that really was not a focus of this piece.
Right.
Um, Very early in the reporting, I sent a Twitter DM to Doublelift and predictably got no response because I think he probably gets hundreds and thousands of Twitter DMs.
Hmm.
Um, and at that point, I also sort of realized that I didn't know what he could add to the conversation that like
Hmm.
was not already out in the public.
Right.
Um, but the story focuses primarily on. I think Blitz gets lost in the conversation a bit, but like Blitz is a company with just like white collar workers, programmers, designers, developers, project managers, and like those are the people who are bearing the brunt of a lot of the anecdotes in this story.
Hmm.
And that's not esports athletes. That's not from a decade ago. That's from 2020, 2021,
Right.
2019. So the kind of those videos are useful in that they substantiate the idea that like, okay, this has been going on for a while,
Hmm.
but they also to a certain degree distract from the fact that TSM, besides fielding esports teams, is also it has a content arm. They make videos. It has sales managers, partnership managers, sponsorship managers. There are VPs at that company that do like standard white collar VP jobs that
Yeah.
you wouldn't think about when you think about an esports organization. And so those are the types of people I talk to for this story. And on the whole, like I didn't really touch on the esports side of things, in part because I don't really follow League very much. So
Hmm.
when people talk about specific players and their interactions with Andy or team houses and beefs from years ago, to a degree that kind of goes over my head. The focus here was on the kinds of workers that I think sometimes get forgotten in the conversation
Hmm.
around esports. So I'd seen those videos. Those were in a lot of cases not really relevant to the people I spoke with. So they wouldn't have even brought them up in the first place because in a lot of cases those people also don't follow League and don't know what
Right.
happened a
Right.
decade ago between Andy and some other player.
Yeah. Yeah, they just like join the organization on the
Hmm.
operation side of things after it got big enough to hire more people, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was just not really in their purview or, a
Hmm.
major priority for them, at least until it became their problem as it seems to be now.
Yeah.
Um, which, yeah, I mean, I guess this then brings to mind another element of things, right? Which is that we've had, I think, in the past, as a result of any number of, either scandals or moments in esports where people are like, players are being pushed too hard. They need more time off. They can't be practicing all the time or, traveling or what have you.
Mhm.
But then what we're talking about here are the behind the scenes people who are helping operate these teams.
Mhm.
And so, like, what is the recourse for them? I mean, in the same way that we're seeing a lot of people in, again, the creation of video games starting to organize, unionize, do walkouts, things like that,
Mhm.
is that, in at least insofar as you understand the situation, would you say that's an option for people like this?
I think maybe to a degree. This is kind of an unproven hypothesis. In my mind, I think there's a bit of a distinction between like games workers and esports workers. I think
Hmm.
esports is, in my mind at least, a bit more techy. It is closer to like, I don't know, Airbnb. Working for TSM is maybe in some ways, or TSM or Blitz is maybe closer to working at, yeah, something like Airbnb or Grubhub than it is working at, you know, Activision or working
Hmm.
at some other game dev studio. And I think the politics are also different there to a certain degree.
Hmm.
Game development, to me at least, from the like Twitter bubble I'm operating from, it feels a bit more kind of radical, more attuned to the sorts of labor conversations that are happening right now
Hmm.
to a degree that I don't really think I see at TSM and Blitz. So I don't know if I'm anticipating like walkouts, labor movements around esports. It's
Hmm.
certainly a possibility. It doesn't feel quite as realistic compared to what we're seeing in game development right now.
Hmm.
um, the other dynamic, though, the thing that maybe complicates this a bit is that um, because of the way these are attached to like esports teams and really prominent figures, attention comes to this in kind of a different, weird way. I don't know that there are that many people in the gaming industry who are really comparable to somebody like Doublelift, who, if
Hmm.
they spoke out, like people would pay attention and it would prompt an investigation from a huge game developer. It would prompt an internal investigation at the company this person used to work at. Um, there are not really, I don't think there's that many people who command that kind of audience
Hmm.
in game development in quite the same way. Um, Without that, like, I don't know if these investigations start, if this conversation starts without Doublelift streaming to his audience and saying, I don't like the management style of Andy. He made people cry. He was constantly doing X and Y and Z. And then that getting aggregated by Dot Esports and
Hmm.
Deserto and all these other sites and becoming sort of like uh, chum in the Twitch waters. So um, it's a slightly different dynamic that's kind of hard for me to pinpoint on air, but it does feel a bit different.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, to your point, it also sounds fairly insular, right?
Hmm.
I mean, like the layperson is not necessarily going to know about, Dot Esports and Dexerto and
Hmm.
sites like that. But these things do have a way of filtering up to a company like Riot. But then you also have this weird cards that all of this is built on, right? Because you say, like, one of the biggest things that's happening here is that Riot is investigating.
Hmm.
And then meanwhile, like, Riot has its own issues that are not intrinsically related to this, but nonetheless, like, Riot has also been, like, widely criticized for labor related issues and
Hmm.
other things like that within its company. And so it's like, when that's one of the biggest authorities that could be doing anything, it just like, it's a strange picture. Again, I don't want to like draw any inferences here that imply like causality or anything like that,
Hmm.
but it's just like, you know, there are all these different like tiers to this, and all of them have kind of like cracks in their foundations or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this whole investigation around this would look very different if the like Kotaku story about Riot had not run when it did, and if those lawsuits had never happened, and if the kind of ensuing crises around that and around Riot had not happened.
Hmm.
So yeah, definitely, House of Cards is like it feels like kind of an apt metaphor.
Hmm. Well, yeah, and so I guess like in terms of what we have here right now, because it does seem like we have this weird sort of, if not stalemate, then at least things are at a point where a lot could happen, but it's not happening yet. Especially with the investigations, which are just sort of like, you know, they Riot has said they're doing an investigation. So is TSM, but it's just like, all right, so now we're just waiting for those to bear out. I mean, you know, insofar as you can have any idea about this, where do you see this going? Like, what happens now? Are we just waiting until somebody says, like, all right, we finished our investigation and here's what we found?
I think to a degree, yes. I can talk about like the steps I will likely be taking over the next couple of days, next couple of weeks, however long this
Yeah,
takes.
yeah, I'd love to hear
Um,
it.
so the general picture is that Riot and TSM are both doing investigations. Those
Mhm,
investigations are probably the results of those are probably going to be announced in tandem. It's
mhm.
not going to be one person announces their thing and then the
Right,
other
of
announces
course.
theirs. They're going to coordinate timing whenever that happens. Um, from my side of things, I don't think people get very much insight into what these investigations usually look like. And so I think over the next days, weeks, I will probably be trying to reach out to folks and see who has spoken with Riot, with TSM's investigators, and try and get a sense of what that looked like from the inside. Just to kind of get some clarity on what those investigators heard, what they knew about, and so on and so forth. Because I think I don't really have a clear sense of which way the winds are blowing. A lot of people seem to be calling for Riot to remove Reggie, or sorry, to remove Andy. Andy goes by Reginald, and
Mm,
so it's been very disorienting to run Reggie Fils-Aimé stories,
yeah, the
and
same
also
week as this.
this. I don't refer to him as Reginald at all in the story because it ended up being too confusing. But um, yeah,
Ryan says maybe Riot will make him do professional training like Sinatra.
yeah, I mean, that's certainly a possibility. I think it ranges from like the things that I imagine could happen in like a
Mhm.
possible package of sanctions from least kind of muscular to most muscular is starting
I
with
do love me some muscular sanctions.
yeah, well, I mean, it's either like it starts with trainings,
Mm,
like maybe a brief suspension from overseeing a part of the organization to fines of various sizes. And then I think the biggest possible penalty they can apply is
mhm,
to kind of create the same ultimatum situation they've set up in the past, which is
mhm.
we'll let you keep your spot in the league, we'll let you continue participating in Riot Games as esports if you kind of kick this person out of a leadership position.
Right, of course.
My understanding, or my prediction, is that that's not going to happen. I
Mhm,
don't really see it. It doesn't feel as though the winds are blowing in that direction. It
mhm,
really does not feel to me like that is the tack that they're taking. Um, Anything is possible. I don't want to mislead people and say that I very clearly know that it's going to be this or that, but my
mhm,
instinct is that it's not going to be the most severe thing,
mhm.
but there will probably be some kind of sanction.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
and
the other thing that brings to mind is just, even if they went with that severe of a sanction, I guess my question to that point would be like, well, even if you get rid of the guy who seems to be causing a lot of these problems,
mhm,
like at a company of this scale, problems are often structural. They don't just
yeah,
come down to one person.
mhm.
And so even if they do that, does the company necessarily change very much? Or does it sort of, maintain a similar cadence, but with a different person up top?
Yeah. The thing that I tried to get into the story to a degree, but that is not like a prominent feature of the story because I feel like it would be way too messy if it started veering in those directions.
Hmm.
Um, in the first anecdote, for example, the first anecdote of the story is about how there's this all hands call, a Q&A session about why a new HR person was fired. Andy is the focal point of that anecdote, but he wasn't the only executive on that call explaining the situation. There was also Walter, whose last name I'm forgetting, who is I don't want to call him like Andy's right hand man, but he's a very prominent figure at TSM. Just did not make it into that anecdote, but was also there, is a part of Andy's inner circle. Is I don't want to like overstep or get over my skis, but like works hand in hand with Andy is how I'll put it.
Mhm.
Later on in the story, there are references to Adil Varani, who's the head of Blitz. He and Andy call themselves co-founders. This is a thing that some people messaged me about. Blitz was actually founded in I believe 2015,
Mhm.
and later the Blitz team was hired by Discord. The Blitz
Mm.
branding and technology was picked up by TSM. Kind of a weird partial sale,
Mhm.
partial acquisition. But of that new Blitz,
Mhm.
Andy and Otto describe themselves as the co-founders of that.
Okay. So you mean
And
it's kind of an Elon Musk tactic. Buy it and
exactly,
say you founded it.
exactly. And there are moments later in the story where people say, I was afraid to bring bad news to Otto Ronnie. And
Mm.
so, like, it is not just Andy. To the degree that you were saying that a lot of these issues are systemic, I think Andy is a very clear focal point because he's at the head of the company and there are these kind of clear allegations of misbehavior and kind of weird workplace conduct. But there are other people in his orbit who are, if not as responsible, they're still like attached to the hip to a degree to the behavior that's happening here. So yeah, I don't know that like forcing one person out would change TSM and Blitz forever.
Mhm.
And I also don't know, the other kind of big question mark for me here regarding Riot is that I don't know if the Riot investigation is just focused on esports. And if it is, it's not going to capture a lot of this Blitz stuff. If it did, maybe the sanctions become more severe. I
Mhm.
just don't know if that's in their purview.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think that those are all like very very interesting questions. I guess like, more of this is going to come into focus in the coming weeks probably as a result of your reporting. So yeah, I'm going to keep my eyes glued not just to the WashingtonPost.com/launcher/video game slash I don't know, here's how to play Jeff Bezos in newworld.org. But also to like to you personally. Every day in Slack, I'm gonna be like, any updates? What's going on? Come on, tell me.
Yeah, and
Give
I will
me
tell you
give me
all
the
of
juice.
the secret details that I can't share on stream, all of the fun behind the scenes reporting stuff that I can't talk about yet.
Excellent.
Um, so
All right. Well, I think at this point it is time to move on to other stories.
sure.
Because there are only so many hours of the day, and it seems like
Mhm.
every Thursday I spend more and more of those hours streaming. So we're gonna try to keep this one a little bit more compact, a little tighter.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So on to other things that we have reported out this week. Kind of as a quicker hit. Yeah, so we ended up publishing an interview with Reggie Fils-Aimé this week, the former head of Nintendo of America. And one of the things that I think a lot of people ended up talking about is that he specifically reacted to recent allegations of union busting and other such kind of anti-labor actions at Nintendo, specifically with regards to contractors who work in QA and things like that at Nintendo of America. And so Reggie's response to Gene Park, our reporter, is that he essentially it was not the company that he knew when he was there. He
Mhm.
sort of his exact quote was, "While I was at Nintendo, we routinely had meetings at events where associates, that's how we referred to our contract employees, were invited. It's just a small example. I was famous for doing bi-monthly and quarterly lunches with employees. It was a basic sign up, and associates were invited as much as full-time employees." And so yeah, I've talked about maintaining a healthy culture, these sorts of things. The basic idea is that he believes that this is something that has, if these allegations are true, it is a change that has manifested since he departed in, gosh, what year was that? When did he leave Nintendo? It wasn't that long ago.
I want to say maybe 2017,
Yeah.
2018.
So that in our piece, if it's not in
I
our piece, we should
I
put
don't
it
know
there.
that it is. Yeah.
Wait, did you edit this or did Mike?
It doesn't matter.
Aha. Okay, so I should be chastising you, is what you're saying.
No. The one thing I want to add to this, just to kind of give voice to this, Reggie's perspective is that in this story he says like, "Oh, this isn't the Nintendo I left. This isn't the company I remember." Some of the things I've seen from other reporters who've been covering Nintendo
Mhm.
suggest that I don't know that these issues did not emerge after Reggie left the company, and
Right,
that
it wasn't like he
there's
was some sort of,
probably
like, dam or bulwark or whatever, like,
yeah.
stopping them from bursting through.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't want to say that like authoritatively yet because I'm like we have not done that reporting. I
Mhm.
think that reporting is likely to come out at some point. It might be deep in IGN's story. They
Mhm.
recently did a report on Nintendo that I haven't finished reading yet.
Right,
Um,
right.
but all just to say that like people have spoken up and said, "Hey, I've seen this Reggie quote. I'm not sure that this entirely adds up."
Mhm. Right. Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, it doesn't on its face pass the sniff test,
Mm,
where, like, you see it and you're like, "Well, that I don't know about that."
yeah.
And I think that it also goes back to the kind of thing that we were talking about with the TSM story, where, you can point to a single individual as a nexus point of either problems or solutions, of
Hmm.
either good or bad culture. But when you are working with a company, especially a big one, and especially when it's big as Nintendo,
Hmm.
it often doesn't just come down to one person. It
Yeah.
comes down to systemic issues. The thing that I think matters here is that when you are a Reggie level leader,
Hmm.
um, it is your responsibility to be aware of these things. And so the possibilities here, if indeed these things existed under his tenure, are either that he was aware and didn't do anything and is now kind of, revising history, or that he wasn't aware, meaning that he was maybe not doing his job to the fullest extent that he could.
Yeah. Hunter in chat who actually surfaced the double lift tweet for me, so shout out to Hunter.
Mhm.
Hunter writes a tale of two Reggies in chat, which is very good. And also very quickly, Ski Sonic left a question. There are other stories.
Yeah.
There aren't other stories yet, but they're assuming that refers to the TSM and Blitz coverage.
Oh yeah.
There will probably be. I don't want to say
I
certainly yet, but probably.
I think you may have also bit on his memeing, because I think he was referring to when I said there are other stories this week, and he's like, "Oh, there's
Ah,
stories. Oh my god, what?" Yeah, so you fell for it.
uh,
Rough.
listen, if I earnestness is fine. If I'm too earnest, if I'm too true to my heart,
Mhm.
if I play it too honest, that's a I don't see that as a bad thing.
Let's see. Yeah, no, right now that's Reggie looking at you for falling for that joke. That's what
Yeah.
that face he's making on the screen is. Let's see. Hi, his ski. Wait,
Hi
what is
ski.
hi
It's
ski?
someone saying hi to Ski Sonic.
Oh, there we go. Okay, now I got it.
Making
I'm
connections.
easily confused by slight typos. But yeah, so kind of moving on from that because I think we hit the main points there.
Hmm.
Another major event that happened this week is that Embracer Group, which is at this point very large gaming conglomerate, bought up a bunch of, and sorry, this will load in a second. My browser hates Kotaku for some reason. Um, Maybe it'll load in a second. Starting to become skeptical
Uh
of my own
oh.
claim. Oh, great. Wonderful. Page is unresponsive. Wait, we can just do
It's
what,
all
6
your
pages?
Kotaku pages.
Yep, it actually is. There we go. I just had to kill them and reload them. All right. Anyway, so Embracer Group, which is a major gaming conglomerate, um, bought up a bunch of companies or a bunch of studios from Square Enix, studios
Mm,
and properties. Um, and so these will give it things like Tomb Raider, which is, I think a household name at this point.
mhm,
And then also the studio that made Marvel's Avengers. Um, and so these things are notable because they're massive names. They are also notable because those games have not really been successes per Square Enix's metrics. I think that they voiced some pretty big dissatisfaction with Tomb Raider in like an earnings call a while back.
mhm.
Admittedly, their sales targets for it were very high, high in a way where, like, I think at the time a lot of people said that's not realistic. But in any case, oh wait, let's see. Uh, in chat, let's see. I'm a little perplexed. How are we at this point when Reggie, which I think we're talking about, the TSM guys,
Yep.
history of being fairly abusive is a matter of public record.
So from
Um,
I saw that question and I think we can keep going with the Embracer
mhm,
story. I have a clarifying question for Nothing Excess.
mhm.
Uh, is the question about why it's important? Like is matter of are you saying matter of public record skeptically is like, this shouldn't be in the public record? Or are you saying like this has been known for so long, why is this coming up now? Just could you explain the question a tiny bit better? I think I can answer it, but need a bit of an assist.
There we go. Okay. Um, right. So anyway, yeah, Embracer is this group that like I find very interesting because they're fairly little known
Mm,
in the world of video games, despite owning a ton of companies at this point. Because this is not their first major video game purchase by any means. Most notably, they bought Gearbox for over $1 billion last year.
mm,
Um, and yeah, so Kotaku put together this whole timeline of some of the studios they bought recently, even. Yeah, they bought Saber Interactive, which is like, a little bit lesser known, but still a large purchase, 525 million. They bought Gearbox. They bought an ad supported mobile company. They bought Asper Media, who's worked on Star Wars remasters and a bunch of other stuff, or Aspire, I think is how you pronounce it.
mm,
3D Realms, which is a very, legacied first person shooter publishing house. They published Duke Nukem and stuff like that back in the day. Um, and then in December, they bought a board game company, which I did not know that, but that's their biggest purchase. Wow. Board game and RPG publisher Asmodee for $3 billion.
huh.
Yeah. But in any case, if you want to talk about like games industry consolidation and a company buying up other companies, which we've seen a lot of this year, obviously with Activision Blizzard, with Take Two, other major companies like that, then you also have to look at Embracer. And so, like, whereas Microsoft and Take Two and companies like that, and Sony with Bungie are going for these like big singular, it's pretty apparent at this point that Embracer strategy is the other way. They
Mm.
are buying up a bunch of small and mid-sized things, but tons of them, just like as many as they can get their hands on. And I mean, you then reach the point of like, okay, so what's kind of the end goal here? And I'm not sure if we really know that, but in any
There's
case, they are clearly gaining power and influence within the games industry.
there's a fascinating comparison, I think, in this story where the size of Embracer is compared to Activision, and I think
Mhm.
they're like relatively even in terms of staff size, which is
Mm.
pretty insane because you just don't hear about Embracer. I
Right.
remember back in the day vaguely knowing about THQ Nordic, and
Mhm.
my impression back in the day was that something was kind of fishy there, but it wasn't really clear what it was. They were
Mhm.
buying up game studios and properties, and it wasn't apparent what they wanted to do with them. Now they're Embracer. That is still true to a degree. Like, I don't
Mhm.
know what the end goal of all these acquisitions is,
Right.
but yeah, they have all of these properties,
Mhm.
um, and who knows where that goes.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's especially because, yeah, back when they were buying up all of these properties and things, I think people expected them to just kind of, have those properties and sell old games in those series and maybe like port them to new platforms, remaster them or what have you.
Yeah.
But I mean, then they went so far as to, make a new Darksiders game.
Mm,
And like they are making new entries on a bunch of other series too and buying up companies that are still operational and series that are still relevant and modern. And
mhm,
like, for example, the the graph that I really like in this piece that really stands out to me is this one right here about Saints Row because
mhm.
it's so indicative of everything Embracer's
Yeah.
doing. So yeah, let's see. If you want to get a sense of just how much of a labyrinth the Embracer acquisition rabbit hole is, consider the mind-bending case of the upcoming Saints Row reboot. The GTA parody series was created by Volition, the storied studio behind Ascent, Summoner, and Red Faction. THQ acquired Volition in 2000. When THQ went bust in 2013, Volition was sold to Koch Media Ambi or Coke. How do you say their names?
I
I
think
forget.
it's Coke.
Coke. Never mind. Anyway, Coke Media sold to Coke Media, became part of Deep Silver. Summoner and Red Faction were sold to Nordic Games. In 2018, Nordic Games finally bought Coke Media too. So then eventually all of these things were reunited because Embracer just owns all of them now. It took,
Mhm.
it took like half a decade, but it eventually happened. And
Yeah.
yeah, so it's just like it's such a strange thing because again, these are not like small money plays. They're smaller money plays than Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard or Sony buying Bungie, but they're still like, this is not a cheap way to do business.
Yeah. I I wonder if all of these studios just become you mentioned kind of releasing remasters, and I immediately thought like, is this like a game pass or streaming play where just like
Mm,
they can throw a bunch of stuff onto these platforms
yeah,
and
and then they become like
organize
the
deals? It just sort of like filling out the backlog for these big publishers that want, or not publishers, but like whatever you would describe Xbox as at this point. that want content for their streaming platforms? Do they become a studio that just like cheaply brings that to market? Do they
Mhm.
become like support studios for other developers that occasionally they have like one or two crown jewel studios that release
Mhm.
real games? That is what I'm curious about. I want to see what this looks like, you know, 3 years from now when
Mhm.
we maybe see more of the fruits of this approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, I think there's definitely something to the idea of them realizing, and again, it's all speculation, but yeah, I think that they could definitely, owning all of these studios and these properties that people have already proven to like be a major player on like Game Pass or whatever. Like
Mm.
if they are stocking up for the Game Pass slash Sony PlayStation, what I don't even know what they're calling their program, that future, then like I don't think that what they're doing is unwise at all.
Yeah,
Mm.
totally. So we'll see. I think we'll get an answer maybe in a couple of years, but who knows?
Yeah. But yeah, quickly before we transition to the next story,
Yes.
Mikhail, if you'd like to take a crack at these comments in chat.
Yes. So very quickly on the double lift thing, just to repeat what I said earlier, we saw it. It was flagged for us by Hunter. Thank you so much, friend of this stream and launcher writer, two or three time launcher writer,
Mhm.
Hunter Cook. Um, we looked at it. We didn't kind of break it down, but the sort of end conclusion is that it feels consistent with what I've heard Andy and TSM do in the past. So not terribly surprising. It's good that that was surfaced. I'm happy to see documentation as a journalist. And yeah, it just from a quick scan, it looks pretty authentic, but that's the extent of like what we know right now.
Mhm.
On the question of like, let me actually read through it because I think these are good comments. There's
Mhm.
videos published by TSM sometimes where Andy Dinh can be seen being verbally abusive to his own employees. We've known about this forever. So if this is a thing that TSM is alleging is not a thing, how do they have literally any leg to stand on? The evidence has been available forever, replayable often on YouTube. I guess my question is, how is it possible that this is becoming a problem now when it ought to have been a problem forever
Mhm.
ago?
Yeah, good
Um,
question.
yeah, it is a good question. I think the issue is just it comes back to something I mentioned earlier, which is that it simply was not being surfaced. Um, I think a decade ago, when there were these videos about, yeah, Andy being rude, getting into arguments with his players, I think those were the very early days of esports. I
Mhm.
think those were also days of very a different tenor of esports coverage and esports journalism, where maybe some people were like, this feels pretty wrong, but like, whatever. It's like young guys yelling at each other in a team house. Like,
Mhm.
it's probably annoying. It's probably rude, but I'm sure this happens everywhere. Um, People have known about it for a really long time. Um, the issue is that like I think there are a lot of people who generally know about stuff, but then there's nothing that like starts the fire to set something in motion. Um, I mean, thinking back, this is a much more dramatic example, but for years before the New York Times did its reporting, before Ronan Farrow did his reporting, there were kind of whispers around Harvey Weinstein, for example. He is an extremely powerful, or was an extremely powerful, like Hollywood magnate. So a different order of magnitude there, but people knew about it. There are jokes in movies about it.
Mhm.
And it was just kind of a thing that everyone sort of knew about, and it was a part of the business, and nobody really made a fuss about it. It was a matter of somebody kind of striking the match, lighting the fire, and then that set off. And I think in this case, that is Doublelift starting to talk about it.
Mhm.
The other thing that I would say is the reason this is kind of in the news now is that there is more to report about it. I think back in the day, what was known was that Andy did not get along, to kind of put it lightly, with some of the esports athletes he worked with. Now, from my reporting, from some of the Wired coverage, it's better understood that this is a TSM wide problem, that it affects professionals at all levels, including VPs who reported directly to Andy. And it's not just at TSM; it's also at Blitz. It is at a company that like the product is esports related, but it is not an esports team. So the standard is a bit different.
Mm.
The kind of public perception of it, I think, is a bit different. And then there's also the reporting in our story about the misclassification allegations, and that I think is new to the degree that it applies to TSM. I think there are a lot of lawyers and people working on contracts in esports who you could ask, and they'd say, this is an industry wide problem. A lot of orgs have this issue, but I just think like the reporting was not there before, and
Mhm.
now it is. So it's a combination of Doublelift speaking out, Riot running its investigation, reporting that shows that this is a wider problem than just strictly esports, like the game side of esports.
Mhm.
Um, and stuff that relates to employment law, to labor law. There are parts of the story that were the parts of the post story that got kind of cut out at the last moment that might become its own story that relates to kind of further labor law stuff. Like there is new reporting coming out, even if the general tenor of the story is relates to the kind of management style of Andy Dinh that people always sort of knew about. So I think it is an element of like something sparked the fire here, and probably there is new stuff coming up all the time that does not relate or at least substantiates the stuff people sort of knew before. So
Hmm.
i I rambled for a bit. I hope that that answered the question.
Yeah. I mean, I think it did, and then some. That was very thorough. Um, but yeah, all right. So moving back on to other news
Mhm.
after briefly moving back to TSM. Let's see. So in particularly grim news,
Mm.
yeah, report came out this week of basically a an enforcer at PAX. An enforcer is basically like the, I think, general volunteer worker who helps like run PAX when it's going on.
Mm.
Yeah, died after contracting COVID-19 during PAX East, which took place last month. Why is my browser trying to die? Going to have to reload that story too.
I will say Fanbyte as a site
Hmm.
often does not work for me. I don't know what it
Uh,
is, but
it's
sometimes
because it's
Fanbyte just
loaded with ads.
yeah. I also
Yeah.
it's very funny right now, the header of the site is just anti, at least what I can see.
Oh
Do
yeah,
you
that's
see
because
the
I use a dark mode extension,
Oh, okay.
and so sometimes, oh yeah, no, it messes with WaPo too. Check this out.
Yeah.
Or wait, it sometimes does. Sometimes it doesn't. I think right now it's good. Sometimes it just says the W up there.
Nice.
It's
I
so
mean,
funky.
that's what we should have called launcher, honestly.
Yeah.
Looking back,
Oh, the W.
the
Yeah.
W would have been great.
Yeah, it really would have.
Oh, we
Like
kind of
or like the WASD.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no. Well, you should have brought me on before launcher launched. That
Yeah.
then I could
I
have
wasn't even on
fixed
before
those.
launcher launched,
Yeah,
so
well you still should have brought me, you
that's
personally still
right.
should have brought me on at that time.
Ah, rats.
Yeah. In any case, so yeah, basically somebody working at PAX
Hmm.
ended up dying of COVID-19 after being exposed during the convention, at least according to a GoFundMe page set up to help with funeral and memorial costs. Her mother had been checking up on her since returning home, and after not hearing from her on Saturday, April 30th, sent the police for a wellness check where it was discovered she had passed away. So that's not great, especially
Mhm.
because I think there have been repeated kind of, instances of people sounding alarm bells over the fact that the video games industry is doing all of these really big conventions
Mhm.
this year, even as COVID continues to be a going concern. And, Omicron continues to mutate into subvariants that are more contagious and that can get past um, boosters and vaccines fairly easily.
Mhm.
Speaking personally, I picked up COVID at GDC, which
Mm.
was a smaller event than PAX East, and yet was still quite large. It was still on the level of, I think, 10 or 15,000 people. Um, so yeah, I mean, this stuff is not going away, and
Yeah.
it is now in this case at least seemingly tangibly led to an actual death,
Mhm.
which is terrible.
Yeah. It's you wrote about this earlier, but it is a bit strange that games conventions are coming back, and even the people at these conventions are sometimes like, I'm not really sure we should be doing this.
Uh-huh.
And it does feel like the industry has maybe gotten a bit over its skis on kind of returning,
Hmm.
um, which personally just kind of feels strange for me, because it does feel as though in the past couple of years, I guess,
Hmm.
there's been an adaptation, and the online experience has sort of worked for at least some of the bigger players.
Yeah.
So I'm not exactly sure why this rush to return has happened. It could just be that people like being in person, and I can understand that, but
Hmm.
um, I'm not convinced that it's worth the toll that it's having.
Right. Well, yeah, and I mean, like, I think that the rush to return is coming from a few places. One
Mm,
of them is external pressure, right? Like, I mean, I think that some of these games industry entities, would have stayed online for another year. I think for a lot of reasons, E3 announced that it's just not happening at all this year.
yeah.
Um, but I mean, like E3 is a good example of one that was supplanted by an online experience, albeit one that was like a mixture of E3 and publishers hosting their own events and Summer Games Fest with Jeff Keighley and all of these things.
Hmm.
But in any case, like that sufficed, right? It worked for the purposes of E3. Um, yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just that, like, a lot of people in the United States and other countries, but especially the US, have decided to just kind of say, like, all right, we're done with the pandemic. So that's
Hmm.
that. And so what that also means is that a lot of companies that would normally be involved in these conventions and convention centers and all of this are also putting pressure on events to go on,
Yeah.
because they're like, well, we've got money to make and there's nothing holding us back anymore. And the laws have been significantly loosened. So let's go.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, like it also becomes this, like, that pressure means that even well-meaning people within some of these organizations kind of end up making decisions that are ill-advised. Like there's a and this is like semi-related, but there's a bar slash event space that I like a lot in San Francisco from when I lived there. And basically, like, they tried to stay in lockdown mode for as long as possible, and tried to, like, continue with mask and vaccine mandates for as long as possible. But
Mm.
when the city loosened them, they were like, look, we are also going to have to do that, because the amount of business we will lose is such that we will probably go under,
Mhm.
um, as a result of other places not doing this anymore. And also, it's really hard to have mandates like this for us when the law is no longer backing us.
Yeah.
So it's just all of these different factors. And like they did this long post where they're like, we're really sorry. We want to keep having these mandates and things like that, because we don't believe now is the time to stop doing this. But
Yeah.
we are in between, we're in a rock and a hard place, and this is just what we feel we have to do to survive.
Yeah.
Um, and I think things like PAX have more wiggle room financially, but they are still running on probably thinner margins than you'd expect. So yeah, I mean, in the end, is worth the human toll? No, absolutely not.
Mhm.
It's still not. And like I think as a result of that, statements like this, where they're like, beloved member of the community joined us in 2014, we're mourning her loss, blah blah blah, always ring a little bit hollow, because it's like, well, you still, you had all the information in the world to know that something like this would probably happen if you went forward with PAX East this year. You
Yeah.
still did it. So I mean, it is on the people who ran this convention. It
Yeah.
is their fault, without a doubt. Um, anyway, moving on to at least slightly lighter topics. Uh, New Warcraft game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, again, comes with its own very significant baggage that we will, of course, get to in a moment.
Mhm.
Um, wow, my browser is just having a rough time today. But yeah, anyway, new Warcraft game. So
Mhm.
Blizzard announced, and I think to an extent, wow, Google Chrome, why? Why are you having all
Unlucky.
this trouble? Man, is it even okay? Here we go. So yeah, they announced a new Warcraft game this week that is mobile first. I think mobile only at the moment,
Mhm.
and they're calling it a tower offense strategy game.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's a very mobile friendly game. It resembles things like Clash Royale,
Yeah.
ArcLight Rumble, these games that are absolutely massive on mobile, some of the biggest video games in the world.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I mean, like in kind of traditional Blizzard fashion, they're doing that thing where a genre has already been out and been popular for a while and has multiple instances of very successful games.
Mhm.
And they're saying, all right, well, here's our version. And our version is going to be broadly accessible and polished
Mhm.
and like will draw on our legacy as this company with properties that everybody knows and loves.
Yeah. I
And
wonder how
so,
much I do wonder how much that translates because like when I think of Blizzard, I don't think of a mobile pedigree. And I think
right.
there are people who are sort of exclusively mobile gamers. And
Mhm.
I wonder if for them the name Blizzard registers whatsoever. It's been how many years since Overwatch, since like a last big release.
Right.
And if you are a mobile first player
Mhm.
and you know about King and you know about all of
Wow.
the studios that do great work on mobile, knowing of course that King and Blizzard are like sister studios
Mhm.
technically under the Activision umbrella, but
Yeah.
um, I'm curious if the name resonates, if like the pedigree registers for players who are
I
mobile
I would
players.
say that you're omitting one thing,
Sure.
which is that Hearthstone is very big on mobile.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. I think that's where Blizzard kind of gained the confidence to do this mobile push that they're clearly doing.
Hmm.
Is that they were like, oh yeah, Hearthstone is massive there. We can expand further in this direction. And yeah, I've seen some people like, oh wait, for Hajim just said a little unrelated, but Clash Royale esports was incredibly hype in like 2018. Peaked at
Huh.
like 280, 850K-ish viewers, which is insane for a mobile game that wasn't incredibly popular in the Chinese market. Hmm. Yeah,
Whoa.
that is news to me, and it's that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious about what happened there. Um, but yeah, no, yeah, it's interesting because there've been some people observing that like Blizzard announced this game, a Warcraft mobile game, and nobody like flew off the handle and freaked out like they did when Diablo Immortal was announced at BlizzCon a
Hmm.
handful of years ago. And I see people being surprised at that, but I'm honestly not, because the circumstances are completely different.
Yeah.
Like Diablo Immortal outrage was a product entirely of time and place.
Yeah.
And the time and place is that Blizzard, didn't have anything really to show for Diablo 4 and like didn't really have much to show in general that year. And
Yeah.
so people viewed the announcement of Diablo 4 as this concession to a mobile audience and this admission on Blizzard's part that they were done making games for core gamers. These things were not true, but it was the reaction.
Yeah.
So now flash forward, Overwatch 2 just, entered beta testing. New WoW expansion got announced before this. I guarantee you, by the way, that was intentional. Blizzard was
Mhm.
like, we must announce the new WoW expansion before we announce Warcraft Arclight Rumble, because
Mm.
if we don't, people will freak out in the exact same way as they did with Diablo Immortal.
Yep.
Um, yeah, so that's what happened there. And yeah, beyond that, I don't know. I'm interested to see how this game does for the same reasons you are, Mikhail, because like Hearthstone does really well on mobile and it's tied into the Warcraft universe. So there's an
Mhm.
anchor there. But, mobile's also a totally different ball game. Blizzard, I think, like even being Blizzard, you can't just drop a game and let the pedigree carry it. So
Yeah.
yeah, we'll see.
We shall see.
Mhm.
I'm always curious about mobile games to the degree that like they command a really big audience and usually there's not really very much coverage of those games. And so like they don't on my radar at least like they don't register.
Mhm.
Although they're really important and people play them a lot.
Mhm.
And that's kind of tough to work around. I'm always curious about those games and then just like I know that I am not a mobile gamer. So,
Right, right. They're just Yeah, because it's that area where, as a journalist, my
yeah.
inclination is always like, well, if people aren't really covering this, then I should try to cover it because
Yeah.
it's clearly important to a large number of people, and therefore it deserves more thorough examination.
Mhm.
But at the same time, yeah, it's like these games are not for me
Yeah.
personally, and so it's always a matter of like time and bandwidth and like how much can I get involved here and how much do I want to cover these other things, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's a difficult juggling act for sure. But yeah, to get to the other side of
Mhm.
things with Activision Blizzard, because there's always a different side to them. In the same week that they made this big announcement of their new hope for mobile, they also got sued by New York City. Um, Specifically, they said New York City basically said Bobby Kotick was unfit to negotiate the Microsoft deal, and the
Mhm.
deal was rushed to get him and the board out of danger of lawsuits over how they handled misconduct at the company.
Mhm.
um, which, given the frame in which it all occurred, notably right after reports of all of this malfeasance started to come out,
Yeah.
you have a strong argument.
Yeah. I mean, Phil Spencer almost said as much, but
Mhm,
I guess he's saying it from the other side of the table, but his perspective was like, I think he quite literally did say this in an interview with someone where it was just like, yeah, we saw the situation they were in, and
mhm.
we kind of talked about this for a long time, but that was the moment to strike, and so we did, and we worked things out.
Right.
It was very much like an opportunistic move, and so it did happen super fast. It was not the sort of thing that was like uh, that had been in negotiation for months in the way that you
Mhm.
usually anticipate these sorts of things to happen. And that's kind of been admitted on all parts. Now, the question really is like, is the reason that Activision Blizzard took this deal the one that New York City seems to be alleging? And I guess that'll come out in the future, but
Mhm.
um, it seems pretty apparent that that is kind of how this all came together. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's also one of those things where, with all of these, because there's so many ongoing suits at this point,
mhm.
as Stephen Totillo points out,
Yeah.
and so like it really remains to be seen how these sort of where these end up going. Like, does Activision face real legal consequences for a lot of what has been alleged, and reported, or does this just end up being, sort of something that hangs over their head for a little bit, and then eventually, as with the first federal harassment suit, do they settle and then kind of, hope to move on? I'm
Yeah.
sure that's what Activision's trying to do, but do they succeed?
Yeah.
And in that regard, we will see. um, yeah, in the meantime, this is another one added to the stack, and it's one that's especially interesting to me because, again, they have a very compelling argument based simply on the facts as they exist that, this is what happened.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, elsewhere in Blizzard land, I have kind of a very relatively quick shot chaser moment, which is that
Mhm.
last week I wrote about the launch of Overwatch 2's beta and
Mhm.
how it was doing really well on Twitch, but how that did not necessarily indicate sustained or future success. So we have one headline. Now we have second headline.
I'm the viewers are going to get to see kind of how the sausage is made, but I'm wondering if there's any value whatsoever in us taking your story and changing the headline now where the second part is the game lost 99% of its viewership 1 week later or something like that. I know that at least Atlantic does that all the time, where they change story headlines
Really?
because they're writing like features that are generally about a subject, and
Mhm.
then they have like a web headline, they have a print headline. The web
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
headline changes based on A/B testing,
Mhm.
and then things change over the course of the day as they see what people are responding to more.
Yeah.
There's certain headlines that they bring back, some that they kind of retire over time,
Mhm.
and so I wonder if there's maybe we get in on the 99% SEO train uh, by updating that head.
Yeah, yeah. We can talk about it. Yeah, no. I mean, and there are obvious reasons for this, though, right? For this drop off, which is that when Overwatch 2 first launched, they were offering drops, so that people could gain access to the Overwatch 2 beta.
Mhm,
Everybody wanted those drops. The way to get them was by watching streamers for 4 hours on Twitch, and so they
mhm.
did. And so that inflated numbers tremendously. Um, and yeah, uh, yeah, Sykkuno just there's 100K watching or Overwatch League's debut on YouTube right now,
Yeah.
but they are giving out beta keys again. So yeah, same incentive structure, same result.
The
Um,
I guess the one thing that I'll say, a thing that I'm sort of curious about, I am generally not a fan of the percentage drops, what's the
mhm,
player count type headlines. Because I think a lot of those are published just for fans of some other game to be able to go
Mhm.
like, this game sucks and I knew it
Yeah.
all along. Um, but like Overwatch 2, just by the fact that it is only out now, does not have a like built-in audience. It is not a crude
Right.
and organic audience. And
Yeah.
that feels perfectly natural. Like a lot of people watch Valorant now because Valorant esports exists and
Mhm.
personalities have developed there, and those personalities have thriving YouTube channels that
Mhm.
surface their best clips and their highlights, and there are casters who talk about the game, and there are analysts, and there's
Yeah,
news
of
in that
course.
scene, and there's this
Yeah, there's a
big
whole ecosystem.
ecosystem.
Yep.
And that just it doesn't exist for Overwatch 2 right now. Like
Yeah.
I if I wanted to tune into an Overwatch 2 stream, I don't know whose stream I would watch. And
Yeah.
until that exists, like of course the viewership is going to go down. It's it feels very obvious to me. I don't want to get in the way of people like getting their page views, but
Mhm.
like of course like it's a beta release. The
Yeah.
fun of the beta release right now, at least for me, is to play the game.
Mhm.
And then once you get tired of playing, you go to a stream and you watch a guy that you like just popping off insanely.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist for this game yet. So I
Yeah,
I
though.
am yeah, my little caveat corner.
Mhm.
Now we can leave the
Yeah.
caveat corner.
I mean, I unfortunately, I'm going to actually, instead of leaving the caveat corner, I'm
Hmm.
going to make another caveat. So I'm
Okay.
going to tunnel deeper into the caveat corner.
Ooh, all right.
So it's more of like a caveat cave. Um, in any
Caveat
case,
tesseract.
yes. But yeah, my caveat is that I think in this case, Overwatch 2 is so similar to Overwatch 1 that for a lot of people like that ecosystem does already exist to an extent
Hmm.
because it's the people who played Overwatch 1.
Yeah.
And like, again, there's an entire casting scene around Overwatch League and whatnot,
Mhm.
which is running on Overwatch 2. Like the lines between these games are so blurry that I
Yeah.
think you can infer a little bit more from how this game is performing right now
Yeah.
than you could from a more traditional sequel. So
That's
yeah.
that's fair. The additional like caveat complication is that because the game hasn't been updated in so long, a
Mhm.
lot of the people who were like the organic community, the ecosystem there,
Yep.
now they've moved on to other games. Like some
They
of
have in
the
fact.
I've recently grown very fond of the Plat Chat guys who
Mhm.
used to be Overwatch people. They used to be
Right, right.
Overwatch casters. Now they're like really big in the Valorant scene,
Yeah.
and they were not brought back to cast the Overwatch League.
Mhm.
And like so if they're playing Overwatch 2, like they're sort of doing it on their own time, but they don't feel quite as integral to that community anymore. They're
Mhm.
now like they are reaping the benefits of being a part of the Valorant community. And I'm
Yeah.
sure there are pros, there are all sorts of other people in the Overwatch ecosystem who over the years of no updates of it sort of falling out of the viewership meta have shifted
Mhm.
to greener pastures. And
Oh
so,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah, and so that's kind of the longer term question is like, can Overwatch 2 lure any of those people back? Or
Mhm.
has it just been, has to Ski Sonic's point, has Overwatch been stagnant for too long?
Mm,
Is it just kind of at this point now where like even if Overwatch 2 is really good and like, the back and forths about that, but even if it turns out to be really good when kind of, Blizzard has ironed out the kinks,
yeah.
um, will it be good enough to draw people back, or did it just like, did it blow its moment? And
Mhm.
then in the intervening period, did especially like Valorant and games like that just sponge up everybody who might have continued to be part of the Overwatch community otherwise? Um, and I mean, like, my inclination, my leaning right now at least, is to say like kind of yeah. Like games do not have very wide windows to become like mainstays in these more competitive scenes or
Yeah.
just in, like scenes in general, especially, like Twitch and YouTube and places like that. And if you miss your window, in a lot of cases, like it's kind of that's it.
Yeah.
And I think Overwatch had its moment too. So a lot of people look at Overwatch and say, well, that used to be big. That used to be the game that we are all playing, but we've moved on.
Yeah.
And so the incentive is even lower to come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh well. Good luck, Blizzard. Sort of only if you clean up all of your other issues first.
Yeah.
Actually, I rescind my good luck. um, let's see. Here we can briefly talk about a video game company doing something good.
Okay.
So this week, Bungie announced, or not really announced, they voiced support of women's reproductive rights in the wake of the, this is a clunky sentence, in the wake of the impending repeal of Roe versus Wade.
Mm,
But yeah, so basically they published a post in which they um, voice support for reproductive choice and also linked to a bunch of charities and things like that that people can support. And then in the wake of that, fans got mad at them. They're like, stick to video games. And Bungie was like, nah, man, we're gonna
yeah.
keep doing stuff like this. Which, to their credit, Bungie has a good track record on. They
Mhm.
tend to stand up for causes like LGBT rights, Black Lives Matter, things like that. They've been pretty consistent here. And so they once again did that here and then stuck to their guns. And if nothing else, Bungie has a lot of guns. Destiny joke.
Woo! Let's go. Yeah, so far I think the interesting thing is that I think to my knowledge Bungie is the only studio that's done something like this.
Mhm.
Maybe I don't want to like overlook any indie studio that might have made a statement or solo
Mhm.
indie developers that might have said something.
Oh
But from
yeah,
the
I'm sure tons
perspective,
of them have.
yeah, from the perspective of like the AAA space at least, this is it feels like an outlier.
Mhm. Yeah, it definitely does. And it's a thing where I think that more people were maybe expecting other AAA studios to speak up
Mm,
that day because they have spoken up in support of things like LGBT rights and Black Lives Matter and whatnot. And yet, in this case, a lot of them were notably silent.
mhm.
And maybe they're just taking their time to craft the perfect PR marketing approved message.
Yeah.
I'll publish them tomorrow or something because it would not be it's not like that's unheard of.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, like it's notable that so far Bungie is the only really major example that you can think of. Maybe part of that could be due to the fact that if they say something like this, then they're also making a kind of implicit commitment on the healthcare side of things, or on the side of like, you know, companies that might be based in red states would maybe have to commit to providing funds so that if people needed reproductive health care or what have you, they could go to a state or place where they could receive it. Um, you know, the implications of making this kind of a statement might be a little further reaching than some of the others, but that's fully speculation on my part. I,
Yeah.
I could not say for sure.
I wonder if I remember a couple of years ago, um, after the killing of George Floyd, there were a lot of game developers who, kind of in the wake of that, started kind of changing internal policies,
Mhm.
donating money, making statements. There was kind of like a clear critical moment in which the public was really galvanized, and I wonder if there are a lot of developers that are like, well, the Politico report that like leaked this
Mhm.
um, suggests that this is probably going to happen, but since we
Yeah,
don't know for sure yet, we're just going to stay
yeah, we're
mum
gonna
on
hold
this
our horses.
until we know for sure.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know.
yeah, no, very possible. I mean, yeah, the bigger companies here definitely operate with a level of caution
Mhm.
that would suggest they might wait until it's all official and done and dusted, which it almost certainly will be, but that'll be the summer. Um, yeah, no, I mean that's a good point too.
Mhm.
In any case, I wouldn't be shocked still though if other major companies say something in the next few days, because it also seems like the discourse is shifting in the direction of calling them out for it,
Yeah.
and that tends to impact their decision making,
Mhm.
which is notable because it's also like how much of this is just an optics thing. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
to what extent are these companies actually going to do anything? If you look at like what happened in the wake of the George Floyd protests, a lot of companies made statements. Some of them made commitments to do something, and then they didn't really do anything notable or change things within their own companies.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you have to keep that in mind too. To what extent is there even an impact from big companies speaking up if their words are kind of, if there's not much behind their words? Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Once again, man, I said that I would keep today's stream shorter, but I did not succeed. Let's see. We have a couple more things to get through. I'm going to skip over most of them because they don't really matter. Oh wait, let's see. Also, Hisham is saying some interesting stuff. How do we feel about esports orgs not making statements about abortion rights? Remember when the George Floyd incident occurred, all orgs came out with a statement expressing their support, but so far I've only seen XSET make a statement. I think esports orgs, even though they most likely support BLM, were more under pressure to say something, as quite literally every brand, even outside of gaming, made a statement about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it is sort of a mirror. It's a reflection of what we're seeing with Bungie right now, where I think more orgs would be saying stuff if other orgs were saying stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that there are like social media managers who have the support of higher ups at their companies, who at Bungie, at XSET, who are making these statements. But at other places, that's just not happening, or
Mhm.
there's like a wait and see approach. I can also just totally imagine, like, we were sort of talking about the distinction between game dev culture and esports culture earlier.
Mhm.
I would not be terribly surprised if this issue were not super on the radar of a lot of esports orgs.
Yeah.
Um, I'm surprised. I'm shocked that like Evil Geniuses hasn't said something,
Mhm.
but for the most part, like there aren't that many esports organizations that have a track record or a reputation for speaking out on these sorts of issues. So
Yeah.
um, remains to be seen, kind of what happens going forward, what happens when and if Roe is actually repealed.
Mhm.
Um, Once that happens, we'll see. But at this stage, there are a lot of like possible answers to why aren't these companies or esports orgs speaking up about this. So who knows?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Moving on to kind of, the I would say last like major kind of bit
Hmm.
super big story of the week, or like I think it's big because I published it. Um yeah, just before the stream actually, I published a story about the fact that kind of the Twitch meta, at least among like kind of certain portions of the platform, has become the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial,
Hmm.
which is not super surprising in the grander scheme of the internet because it's everywhere right now, especially TikTok. But I sort of did a report on the way that it's manifested on Twitch, which I think is pretty different because, again, Twitch is a live streaming first and almost only platform. And so that means that instead of people like cutting up little portions of the trial and, doing videos about specific elements or doing the whole thing that like TikTokers love to do where they, uh, turn into amateur sleuths and try to dig up things that no one else noticed, or they're like, look at that facial expression. That means this and that and that.
Hmm.
Um, they instead are just, sort of watching the entire thing in tandem with their chats, which I think leads to some pretty interesting dynamics just in terms of people kind of being attuned to this whole thing, but then also like you can't just hyper focus for, like 4 hours or whatever. And so it's a lot of whiplash between people being like, I can't believe that the defense is saying this, or that, they're alleging these things, and then doing a bunch of memes and laughing about jokes that ultimately pertain and link back to abuse and,
Hmm.
things like drug usage and other very severe topics
Yeah.
that maybe, it's not always advisable to do jokes and memes about.
There's a quote to that end in the story, but it's very weird that the general vibe of
Mhm.
the kind of average popular Twitch stream is just like I'm hanging out with my friends and we're all like
Right.
we're all on a couch together and we're watching something on TV. And this is if like you got all of your friends together to watch like Come and See and you're
Mhm.
all sort of riffing on it. Just like it
Mhm.
feels very, very strange to me. I understand why it's happening.
Mhm.
I get like the incentive structure. I get why everyone is sort of clued in on it, tuning into this, but it does feel icky to me.
Mhm. Well, yeah, and I mean, it's also just like, yeah, to kind of go into the incentive structures a little bit.
Hmm.
It's this thing where people are clearly very interested in this trial,
Yeah.
but the trial's not over yet. And, I think that people in a situation like this want to be able to draw a conclusion and be like, this is the person who's in the wrong, this is the person who's in the right. And like, I want to see the person who's in the right be vindicated.
Hmm.
But, that has not officially occurred yet. It will not officially occur for, more weeks still.
Hmm.
And so in the meantime, people are just, ravenous. They want whatever they can get. And I think something like a Twitch stream, especially with it going so long and in tandem to the trial itself,
Hmm.
feels like this big piece of supplementary material. Like they're getting
Yeah.
so much more. Um, but at the same time, like, Twitch streamers are like entertainers. They're people who
Hmm.
don't necessarily have that much additional information to contribute.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's a matter of like there's a difference between feeling like you are again getting more information or getting more context and the reality of the situation, which is just that you're getting kind of like an entertainment based supplement
Hmm.
to what you're seeing in the trial.
Yeah.
um and so yeah, it sort of like shakes out in this really weird way that again can feel kind of icky but also is drawing millions of viewers,
Yeah.
and is shaping the discourse around this thing that clearly I think is captivating a lot of people and also causing a lot of people to sort of, I think, do some thinking about topics like abuse and about
Yeah.
like their own lives and relationships.
Yeah. It's it's weird because I think this is kind of Twitch's traditional mode.
Hmm.
Like very recently I was watching an esports event, and usually when you watch an esports event, you're tuning into what is happening in the game.
Hmm.
Oh, I want to see like what how this team is playing. I want to see how this other team is playing. I'm curious about the strats. And I was watching not the mainstream, but I was watching somebody co-streaming it. And
Mm.
in that instance, I was more curious about just the sort of banter between the people who were on stream than the thing that was happening that they were watching. And I was just like, oh, okay, it's like personalities I like and they're chatting. And I
Hmm.
can leave the room and like listen to them. And I don't really care that much about the games that are happening.
Right,
And
right.
that feels super normal.
Hmm.
It is weird when that framework is applied to a trial about like domestic abuse and
Hmm.
abuse between like two celebrities. So,
Right. Well, yeah, and like to really zero in on the framework, I think the other thing that I find interesting here is that, again, people are pretty clearly viewing this through the lens of like one of these people is good and the other one's evil.
yeah.
There's a lot of support for Depp. There's comparatively very little support for Amber Heard.
Hmm.
And like that is playing out across the internet. But I think that Twitch is a platform that kind of intrinsically magnifies that,
Hmm.
in that like it is a video game platform. It is a place people go to watch people compete, and like it is a place where people go for very simplistic like this person versus this person, there's a winner and a loser competition.
Yeah.
And I think that mindset kind of like ends up permeating these discussions even if people don't really think about it or put it on those terms.
Hmm.
Like it's just sort of a natural byproduct of a culture that already does that in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
But it's like, you know as half my attention is usually focused on the emote spam and chat lol.
Yeah.
um but yeah, but in this case what that does is it flattens a lot of what's happening. And yeah, I mean, like I'm glad that at least like one of the biggest streamers, which is Hassan, um you know kind of took his audience to task for this. I was watching him
Hmm.
yesterday, and yeah, like he was talking about this dynamic where everybody is like, definitely, Depp is in the right, Hurt is in the wrong. There's a hero, there's a villain. It's that simple. And yeah, he said like everything is a Marvel story, or every like basically people want everything to be one,
Hmm.
but that's not how life is. And like it does seem like this was a pretty, even if Amber Heard was doing the worst stuff, and like we've yet to reach a conclusion on that at this point, but even if she was, it was also like a mutually bad situation.
Yeah.
And like I think that this is a thing where we as a society do not have very good language to talk about it.
Hmm.
And like, yeah, as also Twitch is full of misogyny, that's an important point to make. Certainly. But I don't think it's just that, right?
Hmm.
Because a lot of the people that I talked to for this story who support Depp were women. That is a very consistent trend here. You see that a lot on TikTok too. A lot of the
Hmm.
like ardent supporters of Depp are women, because they see in Amber Heard somebody who like, for one, they see what they believe to be an abuser, and for two, somebody who like, if she's an abuser and she's making these arguments and trying to like paint herself as innocent, is setting back other women,
Hmm.
because then in the future, they women might be discredited because people can say like, oh well, Amber Heard wasn't being honest and was actually like lying about abuse, so no abuse is real.
Hmm.
um But I mean, I think that the bigger issue that this kind of shows us is that society is just now only like really doing a good job of grappling with abuse at all. And as a result, we don't have good language to talk about when people are mutually abusive, or when, like, you know, there's abuse on both sides, but one side is doing more of it, or like how do you handle that, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like no good. And it also, like, I don't know, it brings to mind all of these other issues involving abuse, in terms of, like, say you have somebody who you label as an abuser, but what if they were only abusive in one relationship? It's not a broader pattern. They don't do it to other people. The person who, like, was abusing the other person they were with was abusing them, and it brought abusiveness out of the person being abused. Like, you know, then what do you do with that person in larger groups? Do you label them as an abuser and cast them out? Or do you say that they were circumstantially behaving that way? Like, there are all these things that we're not really good at talking about, that we need to get better at talking about, that
Mhm.
I hope this makes us better at talking about. But the kind of turn that the discourse has taken, making it into this like one-on-one hero versus villain thing, doesn't leave me super optimistic.
Yeah, I think individual people can sort of carry in their head like, okay, this is like a multifaceted issue.
Mhm.
There's like good and bad in different measure on both sides, and reflected in different ways. I think a lot of the internet is about responding to people. And
Mhm.
so somebody will say, like, oh, well, look at this bad thing or look at this good thing. And that sort of starts the like snowball of, I have to have an opinion on one side or the other on this, as opposed
Right.
to being able to, as a human, kind of hold in my head several things at once, which is this is bad and this other thing is bad
Mhm.
and this is good and maybe this is good, and all of this like works out in a weird way where it is not possible to make a single declarative statement.
Right.
Um, and yeah, as you said, a lot of that comes down to like
Mhm.
not really necessarily having the language or having productive spaces to be able to express that.
Yeah. And also what you just brought up is another thing that I basically said in my story, which is that, yeah, like, everyone is reacting to this right now.
Hmm.
And so in some ways that are like, they are interesting to me, but also kind of like unsettling. I
Hmm.
think that everyone across the internet is more or less in the shoes of a Twitch streamer right now, which is that everyone is just reacting to this. Like, Twitch
Yeah.
streamers do that by nature on a daily basis. But I mean, in this case, because people don't have complete information, because this is still ongoing, people are all reacting to what happens as it occurs, and
Hmm.
are nonetheless, as Twitch streamers need to in order to be entertaining,
Yeah.
um, are still like drawing conclusions, which now is not the time for. And like the structure of a court case is such that it delineates like there is a time to draw a conclusion, and it is not until both sides have presented their cases, their evidence, all of that.
Yeah.
But the internet, and especially platforms that prioritize in the moment reaction, do not have to adhere to those rules,
Hmm.
and do not.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's this funhouse mirror version of how something like this would normally unfold. And yeah, again, I'm not convinced that it's healthy for the way that we consider things as touchy and as important as abuse.
Yeah.
But here we are. And here we will remain, because this is the way the internet's built, and
Yeah.
it just sort of is what it is. um let's see, in other kind of like quickly Twitch related news, and then we're
Hmm.
going to get on to the stupid thing, or the weekly stupid thing, and then in the show. um yeah, the other big thing of the week is that Sykkuno, who is a very big Twitch streamer, moved to YouTube this week.
Hmm.
And that unto itself is already a big deal, because this is the first one of these big signings YouTube has done since they lost their previous head of gaming, Ryan Fwiz Wyatt.
Hmm.
And I think there was some question there, because he spearheaded a lot of that. And so I think there are some questions in the wake of his departure as to whether YouTube would keep kind of, snapping up major Twitch talent in their pursuit of just a bigger live streaming scene. And the answer to that question appears to be yes. And so the thing I found interesting here is that Sykkuno went on to explain why. And he says that it was because Twitch messed up his name. And so this is like the wild part, right? Because basically, so he initially was given a poor offer,
Hmm.
and he was expecting that because of my reporting. um, because I'd done a report, or I did a report last year about how Twitch was lowballing streamers,
Hmm.
and that's a major part of the reason why big name like big names like Dr. Lupo and Tim the Tap Man were going to YouTube, is
Hmm.
that we're being given these offers from Twitch that were just like either vastly lower than what they had before, or were just like kind of insulting based on their status at the time. So they're like, well, okay, YouTube is giving me better money, I'm out. Um, and so that happened to Sykkuno too at first.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was shocked. Everyone thinks it's reputation for giving garbage offer. They did give me one until they upgraded it to a much better one. So his offer was bad initially. He pushed back. They were like, "All right, we will give you more money. We value you."
Yeah.
At least seemingly. And then, um, yeah, he was almost ready to go. They cared. I think it's because Ludwig had already left, and so they were worried, which makes sense. But
Hmm.
then they sent him an email, and they spelled his name wrong. They spelled it as
Yeah.
Sykkuno, and he thought it was a scam initially. Official email I got, yeah. And so when he looked at that, he was like, you know what? Actually, yeah, like you should value me enough that you at least spell check an email.
Yeah.
And so he took YouTube offer. And like I find that interesting in part because it's just like a bonkers anecdote. Like
Yeah.
what a wild reason for a, like probably multi-million-dollar deal to go out the
Yeah.
window. But then like it also makes sense, right? Because like it is indicative of a broader feeling that Twitch does not value creators.
Hmm.
And so it's not just this one thing, right? This is straw breaks the camel's back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, very much like tiny, tiny straw.
Yeah.
But, I think that there is a bigger feeling among creators that Twitch just doesn't really value them very much anymore, at least not in the way that it used to.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. He stated the exact same reasons as Ludwig's lower offer and feeling like they didn't care. Excuse me. Ludwig said he still wanted Twitch, but what made the decision for him was because Twitch didn't try to win. Yeah. Um, yeah, pretty much exactly. So, I mean, we're still seeing this pattern play out even after Ludwig left, and seemingly reacted to him leaving by trying to give Sykkuno more money.
Hmm.
So, it seems like Twitch has yet to land on a formula that wins them talent while also allowing them to kind of, I guess, hold on to more of their money. And in the meantime, YouTube is going to reap the benefits.
Yep. Speaking of, you did an interview with DJ Wheat
Mhm.
last week on this
I did, in
subject on
fact.
community, which you can find on the channel. If you
Hmm.
click through for a shorter version, there's a good clip of that. Just DJ Wheat talking for a couple of minutes about the kind of what appears to be like a gradual shift away from really valuing
Hmm.
community to not really seeming to value it so much at all, and how other competitors in the space are like really, really eager to get whatever that like
Yeah.
secret sauce is that Twitch had that Twitch
Hmm.
no longer seems to value.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm also doing some more reporting right now
Mm.
for future stories about that. And yeah, the impression I get is definitely that there has been a shift away from valuing the community within Twitch, and that like it falls down onto not just streamers but also employees at Twitch. But
Mhm.
I mean, if you really go to bat for creators and community members, like you face career risks at Twitch that are, depending on the department that you're in, pretty
Mhm.
severe.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we're talking, altering your career for years potentially. So
Yeah.
like it's not a place that is hospitable to community right now, even though
Mhm.
that community is, arguably the whole appeal of Twitch. But anyway, now we've made it through the news. We've done it again, another week, an incredible accomplishment. I think I'm going to have to take a call with the president in a moment to award me some kind of medal. I've already
Mhm.
got plenty of them for doing this every week, so I'll probably just say
Yeah.
no. But in any case, we did it. So now it's time for my favorite segment of the week, which is just, some really dumb stuff I found on the internet. I'm going to, for the sake of time, just jump to the one that I think is the absolute best thing that I've seen online this week. And that is people in Japan recreating like GTA movement, but in real
Yeah.
life. It's phenomenal.
This is so good.
They nailed it.
They're so good at it. They're just incredible.
I bought a fan. Great. Yeah, I know. At first when I saw this, I was like, wouldn't it make more sense to recreate Yakuza? But
Mhm.
like they've just nailed everything about GTA so perfectly.
Yeah.
The animations are just exactly right.
Yeah.
Oh man.
The running into a person and them going like, "Hey," it's perfect. It's so good.
But yeah. So anyway, that is our show for the week. Thank you everybody who tuned in and stuck around. We do this every week at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or Eastern whatever. I don't know. What is our? Are we in daylight time right now? I always get them confused.
Just say Eastern.
Yeah,
I think
Eastern
everyone will
Time,
get it. Yeah.
4 p.m. every Thursday. We do story mode. We break down the biggest stories of the week. Sometimes we have guests on, interview them, and all that. Might be doing that next week. I'm not sure yet. And then, are we doing a gameplay stream tomorrow?
I believe we are. I think we're playing Deep Rock Galactic, or
Oh, great.
Teddy, and our video producer John will be doing that.
Then fantastic. Y'all should tune in for that too. Until then, thank you for sticking around, and we are out. So we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Later.